everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Henry Higgins III, and this is a video that I've had in the back of my mind for quite a while now. Going back to the top 10 movies of the decade series that we did about 18 months ago. A series that saw Upgrade by James Whannell be crowned the best film of the 2010s. So when I was putting that series together, coming up with the 10 movies for each year that would go on to the final, I started thinking about which specific year was the best in movie history. And the answer to that, my cinema loving friends, is 1984. Now, quick caveat, I am not saying that the best movie of all time is from 1984, though arguments can be made for a number of the films that are going to be featured in this video. What I'm saying is that for sheer volume of good to great movies, 1984 is hard to beat, though 1999 did give it a damn good try. So, with that in mind, we're going to take a chronological journey through the year that gave us the first TED conference, the Soviet Union boycotting the Los Angeles Olympics, Liverpool winning the Tetris being released, Thomas the Tank Engine and G1 Transformer toys debuting, as you can see with this handsome young chap, and not to mention the birth of many of today's top stars, including but by no means limited to Trevor Noah, Kate McKinnon, Cecily Strong, Aubrey Plaza, Scarlett Johansson, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Serinda Swan, Olivia Wilde, Rachel Taylor, Laura Vandervoort, Annelies van der Pol, Jessica Parker Kennedy, Delta Goodrem, Duffy the Welsh Songstress, Katie Melua, Katy Perry, Calvin Harris, Dizzy Rascal, Bass Hunter, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Nia Jax and LeBron James were all born in 1984. Other movie-centric milestones include Touchstone Pictures being established by Disney, which would allow them to release more maturely themed movies without the Walt Disney name attached, something we're hopefully going to see soon in the MCU Disney side of things, with characters like Punisher and Daredevil reverting back to them, Deadpool as well. They also had TriStar Pictures, who released many wonderful films, officially coming into being when HBO, CBS and Columbia Pictures joined forces. They became, at that time, the first major Hollywood studio since the late 20s when RKO came around. Became the first major new Hollywood studio to be established. There was also quite a big change when it came to the rating system, because in the US, the PG-13 rating was brought in due to films such as Temple of Doom and Gremlins, released in 1984, pushing the boundaries of children's content. Wasn't enough for the R rating at the time, but was too much for the then current PG rating. Incidentally, here in the UK, we would see something similar, changes to the rating systems, when Batman 89 became the first 12 rated film, because they wanted kids to see it, but it was too much for our PG rating, but not enough for 15. While in 2002, Spider-Man became the first 12A rated movie, which essentially means that anyone under 12 could attend the film, but they had to be with an accompanying adult. Again, you'll notice these are both comic book movies, and it was designed to get as many people into the cinemas as possible to generate as much as they could in relation to revenue and merchandise. So as you can see, even before we get to the movies, 1984 already has a lot going for it. So enough dilly-dally, let's break things down month by month before delivering a top 10 countdown to highlight why 1984 is the greatest year in film ever, and find out which of those movies is the greatest film from the greatest year ever. Okay, not off to the best start, but that's not to say there was no movies released in January 1984. There were. It just wasn't anything of note. Okay, so we're still not off to the best of starts. But for a one film month, February delivers a rollicking yarn of parochial sensibilities trying to stifle the joys of youth in the form of Footloose. Kevin Bacon's first blockbuster starring role, and he knocks it out the park opposite John Lithgow's antagonistic minister who bans dancing and rock music in a small US town. The songs are iconic, A Star is Born, and dishearteningly its themes about narrow-mindedness and the scenes of book burning remain relevant almost 40 years later. Third month of 1984, end of the first quarter, and now we're getting somewhere as cinemas showcase comedy, drama, horror, slapstick, romance across the movies like Greystoke, Against All Odds, Children of the Corn, Splash, Repo Man, Police Academy, Romancing the Stone, and the truly sublime This Is Spinal Tap. Something for everyone, and each movie a different beast showing a wide-scale diversity for all ages. Even now, in 2022, you will find people quoting Spinal Tap or Police Academy due to how iconic they became. April, and we take a step back on quantity but not on quality, as we have what is considered to be one of the best slashers ever in Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, which is the conclusion of the 2 to 4 parts of the franchise trilogy that was also meant to actually be the end of Jason Voorhees entirely. Similarly how Halloween 2 in the original run was meant to be the end of Michael Myers, and they carried on the legacy as an anthology. Of course, money is the most powerful necromancer in Hollywood, and the Masked Maniac, who is my favourite horror movie villain, he came back for another 7 films and counting. So you can't help but respect a series that had not only 1 but 2 finales, and neither were the end of the franchise. The other 3 movies here are less well known but deserve a viewing. Iceman is a well-made tale of explorers finding a prehistoric human and throwing him out after 40,000 years. Now this is a story that has been used, or a backdrop for a story that's been used in multiple movies over the years. John Lone plays the titular Iceman of the movie. He's not someone I'm familiar with this being an interesting study in humanity, spirituality and the idea of self. There is a Brendan Fraser movie called California Man, or in the US it's Encino Man, which is also about a prehistoric human being thrown out in modern society. That is a broad comedy. This is not. This is a drama. It takes a serious look at it, and it's well worth a viewing. Moscow on the Hudson, on the other hand, is a heartwarming romantic comedy starring Robin Williams. One of his most underrated films and one of his most overlooked roles. He's a Russian saxophone player who defects to the US. It's a more dramatic film rather than an out-and-out comedy. Think along the lines of Good Morning Vietnam, Patch Adams and Awakenings. And Robin Williams is perfectly cast for the lead role here. And lastly, from the image we just saw, but by no means least, there's Swing Shift, which is another dramedy, this time starring Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, who would become romantically involved during the making of the movie and have remained together ever since. They are ably supported by Ed Harris, Fred Ward and Holly Hunter, which is a hell of a supporting cast, and the 2 leads sparkle in a movie filled with funny moments to complement the real-life struggles war wives had when their husbands came home after years away. Heading towards the summer months now, and things are heating up quite literally in the Stephen King adaptation Firestarter, which itself is getting a remake this year in the same May weekend as the original 2, which is quite a nice little bit of synergy there. David Keith, Heather Locklear, George C. Scott, fantastic character actor, and Louise Fletcher all star alongside a child prodigy, Drew Barrymore, in the lead role of Charlie. She's an 8-year-old girl with pyrokinetic powers, and it didn't review well, but has remained a cult classic and is one of my favourite Stephen King adaptations to screen. Alongside that, we have Alphabet City, Finders Keepers, The Bounty, which has heavyweight performances by Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson, Robert Redford in one of his best movies, The Natural, a cultural phenomenon with breaking, bringing hip-hop culture and breakdancing to the masses, and two bona fide juggernauts with 16 Candles and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The former is a coming-of-age teen drama, the type that only John Hughes seemingly can deliver, with fantastic casting, iconic music and a witty script, while Temple of Doom does have a lot of problematic elements when viewed today, but they don't stop the movie from being a rollicking thrill ride, with Harrison Ford expanding the lore of the Intrepid Explorer in this, which is a prequel. A lot of people forget that it's a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So in May, we had 8 very different movies for very different audiences, and they were all stellar. Reaching the halfway point of the year, and the summer season is in full flow. By this point, after arguably Jaws in the 70s had established the summer blockbuster, the summer season was well ingrained with the masses and with Hollywood itself. And in 1984, Tom Hanks follows up Splash with Bachelor Party. Burt Reynolds returns for Cannonball Run 2. And please stay after the movie for the bloopers in the credits. It was one of the films that pioneered the staying for the credits experience. Val Kilmer stars in Top Secret, which may be the best kept secret in the spoof genre, while Rhinestone has Dolly Parton and Sylvester Stallone as co-leads, which sounds insane, but it works. But wait, there's more. June is a veritable smorgasbord of cinematic wonder. Once Upon a Time in America is the gangster epic to end all gangster epics, while Arnie brings back one of his most iconic creations in Conan the Destroyer. It's a great film. For me, it's not on a par with Conan the Barbarian, but it does have some fantastic elements to it. Star Trek tried to follow up with many consider the best sequel in movie history in Wrath of Khan, with Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock, following the Vulcan sacrifice in the climax of the aforementioned Wrath of Khan. It doesn't quite do it as the curse of the odd numbered sequels began here. It is a decent movie, but there is enough good to warrant its placing here. But as a follow-up to Wrath of Khan and is a precursor to Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, it's a bit of a misfire, but there's plenty in there to get going. Speaking of iconic though, martial arts got a shot in the arm, like it did with Enter the Dragon in the 70s, as Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita wax on, wax off their way into our hearts with The Karate Kid, starting a franchise that is going strong today with the Cobra Kai TV series. All of that fades in comparison to the double header that is Ghostbusters and Gremlins. These two were released on the same day. Ghostbusters and Gremlins were released on the same day in 1984. Imagine that in today's market. That'd be the equivalent of something like Avengers Endgame and Star Wars The Force Awakens being released on the same day. Two iconic franchises that stalled after their second part. Ghostbusters finally got a third. Gremlins could be far behind. They were released on the same day, and they are both timeless classics. Quotable lines, scenes worth watching over and over, fantastic characters, and expertly both of them straddle that line between comedy and scary, especially for what are ostensibly kids' movies. So as we cross the streams into the second half of the year, I'm hoping it starts to sink in why I believe 1984 was it when it came to the best year in film history. After the blockbuster heavy June, it seems like July was a month for underappreciated and underrated classics. The double bill of Meatballs 2 and Revenge of the Nerds covered that also 80s plot of Nerds v Jocks, while we also have Dudley Moore and Eddie Murphy delighting in Best Defense. Fantastic comedy, vastly, as I mentioned previously, underappreciated, and it's one of the better comedies for both men, but it gets vastly overlooked due to their other work. We also have Prince exuding being a star in Purple Rain. We have The Muppets Take Manhattan, which objectively is very well received and very well beloved. However, I have a phobia of Fuzzy Bear. It's weird, I know. So I can't watch it. I've tried and I can't get through it because it's a genuine phobia. I don't feel comfortable when I'm watching Fuzzy Bear on screen. So I can't watch The Muppets because I don't know when he'll appear. But The Muppets Take Manhattan, objectively, is a well-received movie and one of the better movies of 1984. And we also had the quirky Electric Dreams, which entertains. Now, you may have seen some of these, you may not have seen some of them, so I definitely recommend that you do. And that leaves two movies for July that have a special place in my heart. The Last Starfighter could have been an easy Star Wars clone. We weren't short of them back in the day. But while it did feature a young Wookiee going to space, the premise, the effects and the story all elevate it and allow The Last Starfighter to stand on its own merits. And finally, we have The Neverending Story. A fantastic epic told through the eyes of a young boy on Earth, firmly framing all of the young boys watching as the protagonist. And it's another movie with amazing characters, stunning puppet work, drenched in sadness, oh, the sadness, and scenes that haunt adults like me even now. No hyperbole, this is a masterclass in storytelling for kids without dumbing things down. And it is a movie rightly passed down generation to generation. I have watched this movie with Josh, who you've seen on the channel. I've watched it with his older brothers. I've watched it with my cousins, who are between us in age. And if you haven't seen The Neverending Story, please do. It is fantastic. As we exit from the summer of 1984, we have another octet of awesomely eclectic titles in August. With The Horrors of Chud and The Philadelphia Experiment, to the quirky Flashpoint, the downright surreal The Adventures of Buckeye Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, starring Peter Robocop Weller alongside Christopher Lloyd and Jeff Goldblum, the more relevant than I'd like Red Dawn, and Clint Eastwood giving good Clint Eastwood in the thriller titled. We also have the unfairly overlooked Dreamscape, which by the poster slash VHS cover, most people dismiss this as an Indiana Jones ripoff when it is so much more. Yeah, check that one out. And finally, we have the always wonderful Gene Wilder, who in the 80s just gave us a litany of fantastic comedies, and the literal red hot Kelly LeBrock headlining possibly the romantic comedy of the 80s, which is saying something, in The Woman in Red. Not, as many people call it, The Lady in Red. That's a song by Chris the Butter. It's hard to overstate how much of a head turner Kelly LeBrock was in the 80s. With this and Weird Science, she was definitely responsible for the sexual awakening of many teenagers across the world. Couple her with the self-deprecating humour of Gene Wilder, and you have a match made in heaven. After the triple whammy of June, July and August, summer makes way for autumn, or fall if you want to get American about it. And back in 1984, this was a time where the studios scaled back a little before coming back later in the year to take advantage of the holiday season in December. Due to this, only 4 movies of note for September, though they are all good to great in their own right. The Wildlife is an often overlooked entry in the teen comedy genre, as we have Chris Penn, Eric Stoltz, Rick Moranis, Randy Quaid, Jenny Wright, and Leah Thompson. Quick segue, Be Still My Beating Heart. Leah Thompson, 1980s Leah Thompson was it for me. She was the most beautiful, the hottest actress in the world back then. They all star in a movie written by Cameron Crowe and directed by Art Linson. Reading that back, that is a hell of a pedigree for an 80s teen flick, and no mistake. Steve Martin was also on a great run during the decade, and All of Me is a fantastic high concept entry into his canon, as he stars as a guy who ends up possessed by the spirit of Lily Tomlin's character. As you can imagine, with those two in the 80s, hijinks ensued. And rounding out the month, Drew Barrymore returns alongside Ryan O'Neal and Shelley Long, this time as a 10-year-old divorcing her parents. It is a comedy, and it is a damn good one. Going into the final quarter, and October heralds the arrival of a franchise that absolutely will not stop, ever, until the cash cow is dead. Before we get to that though, let's look at the other movies here. The Razor's Edge has Bill Murray in a less comedic role than his normal fare, especially for back then, and Eureka has wonderful turns from Gene Hackman, Rutger Hauer, Mickey Rourke and Joe Pesci. It is an underrated gem. A staple of the 80s which seems to have disappeared, that lasted into the 90s, the mid-90s, and then seemed to have gone. A staple of the 80s was the erotic thriller, and October gives us 2 great examples. First we have Body Double, a Brian De Palma directed film to savour, and then we have Crimes of Passion from Ken Russell, which stars Kathleen Turner and Anthony Perkins from Psycho in the lead roles. Teachers is a darkly black comedy with great turns from Nick Nolte, Jo Beth Williams, Ralph Macchio and Judd Hirsch, while we have 2 iconic art films with the crime noir Blood Simple, the debut feature of Joel and Ethan Coen, incidentally, and the laconic road movie Paris, Texas with Harry Dean Stanton, Dean Stockwell, Natasha Kinski and Aurora Clement. However, as mentioned at the start of this section, we also saw the first entry in a beloved franchise that has had its ups and downs, but started with James Cameron's iconic in every way, The Terminator. With only the micro-budget Piranha 2 to his name, Cameron turned what could have been a low-budget throwaway genre fare, which we had dozens of back then, about time-travelling robots, and he turned it into a masterclass in tension, special effects, character work, creating this hybrid of a sci-fi slasher road movie that is so much more than the sum of its parts. From the truly awe-inspiring practical effects work of Stan Winston and his workshop, to the smartly minimalistic approach to Arnie's take on the title role, married with the genuinely touching love story between Michael Biehn's Kyle Reese and Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor, The Terminator remains a favourite worldwide for a very good reason. It also spawned another movie that many consider the best sequel of all time in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and the franchise encompasses movies, video games, and a great TV show, while for me James Cameron has the best batting average of any movie director in history. With winter approaching, November had a little something for everyone. Supergirl didn't live up to its promise and had little to do with Superman outside of a few minor references, but it does retain a certain charm and the actors do the best with what they were given. Missing in action is Chuck Norris being Chuck Norris in his 80s pomp. The Killing Fields is as harrowing a true story drama that you're likely to find, especially from the era. Whereas contrastly, Oh God You Devil is peak George Burns, that while dated now, still retains a few belly laughs. And Night of the Comet is an oddity, and one that if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go in blind. The less you know, the more you'll enjoy this film. And that leaves two horror movies that are both worth viewing. The first, Silent Night, Deadly Night, plays off the named after a date trope spawned by Halloween to good effect, but it is rightly overshadowed by Wes Craven giving the world a genuine horror icon in the shape of the clawed hand, Freddy Krueger. It is interesting that 1984 was meant to be the year that Jason Voorhees was done and Freddy Krueger comes in. That would have been a nice handover, but of course they just went on. Some would argue that they went on too long. Freddy Krueger. This is a character which was absolutely terrifying in 1984. And while comedy would be increasingly added over the sequels, at least until the return to form that was New Nightmare, Freddy and his blades would literally haunt nightmares for the next 4 decades. And as we enter the final month, the 12th chapter of 1984, the year is rounded out by another mishmash of genres and styles. We start, of course, with 1984 itself, an adaptation of George Orwell's frighteningly prophetic book. It was poetic and cynical that it was released in the titular year, but of course, when else are you going to release it? The movie itself is wonderful with amazing performances, ideas that seep into everyday life, such as Big Brother, Room 101, and a message as timely as it is now as it was then. More dramatic weight is provided by Birdie, 2010, the sequel to 2001 A Space Odyssey, and Jeff Bridges being sublime in Starman, while Sci-Fi saw the first adaptation of Dune. 2 crime comedies also popped up in the shape of the Clint Eastwood Burt Reynolds starring City Heat and the Michael Keaton headlining Johnny Dangerously. And a quick side note, the look of Michael Keaton in this movie is what inspired Paul Heyman's wrestling character, Paul E. Dangerously, because back then he looked very similar. And how could we end the year better than with the debut of inarguably Eddie Murphy's greatest role, Detroit police detective Axel Foley. Hilariously supported by Judge Reinhold and John Ashton, along with Ronnie Cox, Paul Reiser, Bronson Pinchot, and Steven Berkov in the villain. This is as 80s as you can get and remains one of the funniest action movies of all time to this day. Top that off with Harold Faltermeyer's flawless Axel F, and the year 1984 goes out with a bang. So there we have it, a list, and not an exhaustive one, of the good to great movies that were released across 1984. A total of 74 films that I will attempt to create a top 10 countdown from. So how does one cut down 74 to a mere 10? The short answer is with great difficulty. There will of course be wonderful movies that miss out, possibly your favourite, and that is the beauty of subjectiveness and personal preference. For the top 10, I will be weighing them up on enduring legacy, pop culture relevance, enjoyability, and rewatchability. Due to this, there will be some movies that I think are absolutely stunning, but not ones that I would watch again. There are some movies that you just watch once. So, that will be on the next video. Look out for it. It'll be out next week. It'll give you a chance for everyone to catch up and watch this video. We will go through the top 10. I will have comments from friends and subscribers on who they believe to be the number one, their favourite movie of 1984. There will be my top 10 countdown. Then, as with any top 10 countdown, with any list whatsoever, there will be debate, there will be disagreements, there will be tears, there will be laughter. But objectively, hopefully, you will see why subjectively I have chosen these 10. But as I said, that is in the next video, so thank you very much for watching this one. Please like and share, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss out on any future videos. Look after yourself, look after each other, enjoy the movies, check out any of the movies that I've mentioned here that you haven't seen. Leave your comments below on which of the movies listed you think will make the top 10, which you think will be number one, and I will see you all again soon. Goodbye.